Hi, Peter Allen, Figure Transformations, part 2 of the video about our hips and what we can start to do to facilitate the movement and kind of start breaking up that scar tissue. First, what I want to do is just kind of a couple quick movement patterns, and this is what I'm going to start to do more to see if I can facilitate faster breakup of the tissue. Now, if you do any of these kind of movement patterns, just do them as far as you're comfortable going. I don't want you guys going into too big a movement pattern that isn't comfortable for you or puts too much pressure on the knees or anything. Again, it all should be centered around the glutes. If our glutes are working the way that they should, we shouldn't have pain throughout the rest of our body. Myself included, I'm realizing my controls are not working the way that they're supposed to, so my movement patterns are deviating. Now, I can strengthen them in these kind of bad positions, but really what I want to do is I want to fix these positions. So first one is I'm going to come into a front lunge. I ideally want my knee going forward. I'm going to descend down. Now my hips are a little bit off. I can tell this one's up a little bit higher than it should be now that I understand the movement patterns and kind of how tight my glute is. My glute's kind of here. It should be back a little bit. On the side, again, it developed too much scar tissue. So what I'm going to do is kind of come in and drive back. And in, and I should be watching that knee so you can see it wobbles a little bit. And again, I've been not kind of doing this on purpose. Because I've been trying to understand what happened to our body and how we can fix it. Now that I understand how we can fix it with percussion therapy, I'm going to start adding in a little bit of movement patterns to get the fascia maybe kind of moving and breaking up a little bit better. And then also so we can all kind of use it as a gauge or guide of how we should be moving and what positions we should be in. Okay? And also how we can follow along and see how your improvements are, how my improvements are. So my right leg, I'm coming into this. I know I can see it, it's up. Oh, and again, I used to try and break up the scar tissue on the top all the time. And I got nowhere, absolutely nowhere trying to break this tissue up. I was always kind of trying to dig my elbow into it, whatnot. Now that I've started to break up the tissue on the back of my glute, I can actually feel this hip moving so much better. When I'm cycling, I can move better, feel better. I want to drive. I can actually feel the glute already, being better. But I know I got to get it out in terms of movement, and we're going to get into that next one. So I got to try and figure out kind of what's the best kind of number of reps. Okay, maybe you're only coming into here, pushing back here. Again, try and stay out of too much pushing through the ball of the foot. I want to land heel, toe. Now I'm going to push through my heel to facilitate better glute activation. I'm going to play around too eventually with where the pressure should be or whatnot. So if I go into a reverse lunge, I should be all the weight on the front, coming in, going as low as I'm comfortable going, and back out. Okay, it's always your comfortable level. Now I know people can come all the way down, kind of fall. Now you're going to have a hard time getting out of that. Okay? So just go with whatever's comfortable. Reverse lunges are always the hardest because they require balance, okay? We don't really know where that foot's going in space, especially like for me, I feel my adductors kind of pulling me. So I might take a little bit fatter stance. Again, these legs should line up, okay? Straight, you can notice that my left hip might kind of rotate it out. If I was loose enough, I should be able to stay straight, should maybe rotate out a little bit, but because each side affects the other one, it's going to change how we move. Now another good gauge for our hips, usually we used to use this for hamstrings, but it's coming down into here, and of course our hamstrings are going to be tight if my hips aren't moving. So if my hips are too tight, it's going to facilitate, or I'm going to have to start using my secondary muscles too much. Our body has a ton of redundancy patterns throughout it, and kind of that's what ends up happening when we injure ourselves or we kind of get pain, is these secondary muscles. The thing is, when we're loosening the hips too, it is good to kind of, I'll show you after, to loosen the legs or stretch the legs as well, because again, you're promoting movement pattern throughout all. So I'm going to hinge. I want to drive my hips down into the ground. This is again something else I'm going to kind of start to work on and understand a little bit better. Whether it's maybe deadlifting or hinging or whatever. But again, it's It's more about the tissue and our flexibility and our posture than it is about anything else. I've noticed increased strength and stamina just by loosening the tissue, not really doing literally any exercise besides cycling. And that's what I've been using to gauge my movement patterns. So again, I can feel my glutes, but they're up probably a little bit too high. I should bring them down a little bit. I'm just doing this just to get the tissue moving. Now I'm just going to go into a squat. So again, I can feel the tightness on my left pushing me into my right. And that's been happening for years. I couldn't figure it out. Now I finally understand it enough to be able to kind of start loosening. All right, so we're going to do percussion gun. I'm using the Hypervolt. I'm sure there's plenty of great ones out there. I just noticed this one to relatively work well. And it does matter in how much pressure you are able to kind of put into the tissue. It doesn't want to hurt, shouldn't be uncomfortable, but you want to be able to use this enough. So I'm going to put this, I got a setting of 4. And again, I'm just going to put it into that kind of tight part so I can feel it right here, right where that glutes attaching. And that's kind of what's happening is you start to notice, if you do this, what muscle is the tightest and kind of what's happening to the body. So again, I got to work on the hyper arch of my back to pull in my stomach again, because that's another thing I notice is my stomach does not go in and up the way it used to. It's just too tight, basically, and lost its flexibility. And that's kind of really what happens throughout a whole body system, if you think about it, is we lose our flexibility and the tissue's ability to lengthen and shorten. All too often it's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter as we age. So again, I'm just kind of following these tight lines, slightly leaning forward, going right out to, again, attachment. So here's your attachment for your glutes. Effectively the butt glute max is way down here. I've noticed that, my right glute was just not firing. It couldn't fire because of the angle that it was stuck at. It had kind of done what I thought it was. It's kind of sucked in and gotten too tight, and I developed all this scar tissue up and around my hip. So my adductors had to start taking over. When my adductors got too tight, then it became back into the quadriceps, hamstrings, became too tight. So by understanding what happens through our body and how it tightens up, we can start to kind of learn how to unravel it, if you will. And again, I haven't found anything besides this percussion therapy that gives you this lasting kind of result. And once you kind of start doing it, if you just kind of keep up with it, it just kind of continues to move the tissue. And you're able to kind of systematically start to release. And again, the butt comes all the way up to here. And now I can see that the tissue up here is really hard. Again, we're kind of not realizing all too often how high our glutes are coming. The glutes coming all the way up to here. This is kind of my low back, tailbone area. We're too focused on up here. Not enough kind of up in the top area where, again, because the bottom does become too tight, the top can't fire the way it should. Now my hips can't move the way they should because my glutes are attached to my tailbone. And again, if they can't move right, then neither can the rest of my body. Now I'm making up for it everywhere throughout my body. And we live in a world that we're tending to use one side of our body way too much, more so than the other. And again, just because we're not moving enough, and again, even if you are moving enough, your tightness starts to change how you move over time. And that's what I started to understand is no matter how much exercise I threw at it until I started getting more flexible, would I truly be able to kind of stop or reverse the aging process, if you will. Now I could always build more tissue on top of it, but I'm just making myself tighter. And by building more tissue on top of it, I'm pulling more. And that's kind of what we got to start to understand is, every time we're exercising, we may be lengthening and shortening to a certain degree, but we're never taking it to that full extreme, especially with our upper body. Really hard to do it with your lower body if you think about it. And I notice a lot of people too, all too often when they're squatting, they're only going to here. So again, you're not working the full range of the motion pattern. So what's going to happen? You're going to start to become tighter and tighter over time. And This is why I used to always promote and still promote that we need to work our bodies in full range of motion. Now, if you were lucky enough to be really active when you were younger, you might be able to still kind of do a lot of these things. But a lot of people don't get into exercise 20s, 30s, maybe weren't active. And again, we're not realizing that our tightness is a huge influence on our movement patterns. And, I too often, chose exercise over stretching because, that's what we think makes us look better, feel better, and it does to a certain degree. But once, I don't know, maybe I hit a certain age, I started realizing like, okay, I gotta start figuring something out here. And I've been studying movement patterns, probably pretty much my entire adulthood life, and started to understand really what's happening, or I took the time to understand. So I'm gonna kind of work on my left a little bit now. Same thing, I'm gonna kind of hinge over. The other thing I noticed is I've been using kind of the pointier part. They say it's for deep tissue release, which it does work. It's better to kind of pinpoint your accuracy in terms of where you're trying to get that tissue to release. Not to say the other ones won't work. I just have had better results with this one. I've kind of played around with them all and just started to notice that this one, again, if you look at the tissue when it's hitting, you can see the ripple effect it's having throughout the body. But the key part is to get the tissue in a stretch position. So again, I'm kind of leaning forward, forcing that to move or activate a little bit. Just trying to look for areas that are, again, it's really tight. It's almost going to feel like you're on bone, but I know there is no bone right here. That's just tissue. Okay, my bone's way over here, and then the femur is really deep. You got to think of how deep that femur really is. Okay, we got about 2 inches. If you were to put a needle through your shoulder before you would even hit your bone in your deltoid. Okay, same thing with your butt. You could put a 2-inch, or even a 3-inch. I don't know how far it goes, but you got to think of how far that is. Okay, 2-3 inches before I hit the muscle or before I hit the bone. So how does it seem like I have bone right here then? Again, that's scar tissue that's developed, and we're just not realizing because we're kind of seeing the tissue on the top and thinking like, oh, okay, well that's all muscle, okay, or it's fat or whatever. Not realizing a lot of times that again the muscle is going much deeper, but it gets so tight that it starts to restrict our movement patterns. This is why, like again, traditional massage cannot get to this kind of deep tissue. I worked on it for years trying to do it, and I had great results too. Don't get me wrong, but if I really wanted to see a huge improvement and something lasting and kind of ever changing, this is it. This is how you move your fascia and start to promote better movement patterns. It's just kind of you have to start and stay with it. Now another key spot that I'm going to go into. You come here and cross my legs. You can be on a bed, but again, I'm just going to get to that. And again, it seems like bone, and just slowly work that tissue. Now, a lot of times, I want to just sit in that one area. So I used to do this when kind of releasing muscle tissue as well. So with pressure, I'm going to kind of hold and put it there for 20, 30 seconds, whatever. I'm going to move to the next spot. All too often what we're doing is kind of moving too fast and we're not applying enough pressure. Again, none of this should hurt. Now you might feel sore afterwards. So one of the things I'm noticing is kind of almost like a worked out type of sore because the tissue is starting to release. What we want to do is start to stretch our body as much as we can and then apply this kind of percussion therapy. Again, by doing this systematically throughout the body, you can really start to get effective change. We all just think our bodies are moving perfectly. And if that was the case, we wouldn't have posture issues, we wouldn't have injuries, or if we did have the injuries, we kind of know exactly what to do to fix it. But because of, again, not understanding that our muscles in our body isn't moving exactly the way we think it is, and kind of understanding of how it really is moving. We're also often caught up on this muscle does this muscle does that, not realizing that again, that joint is out of place, but that muscle is not doing what we think it is. Just because it's connected to one end or the other, if it's too short or kind of out of place a little bit, it's going to change and alter everything. So again, I'm going to get the other side, cross that leg over. Again, I'll kind of even go far into this. And just see, letting that leg release. Now, much easier if somebody else is doing this for you, and again, kind of systematically helping you out to understand this. That's what I'm doing for my clients and whatnot. And, people who are interested in kind of learning and understanding more about the body, and better ways to fix it. I mean, I'm getting tremendous, the best results I've ever gotten in my entire life, and I've been trying everything for the last 20 years to kind of learn how to age well, if you will. And this is the best technology we got right now to do the job. If we could do it without kind of technology, somebody would have figured it out by now. It's kind of what I kept trying to do. I was very reluctant myself to try and start using a tool, and kind of, they say they don't know how effective it is. You can come study me if you want. I'll show you how effective it is, and you'll see over the course of the videos of how effective it is. It's hard sometimes to see personally on a video, and that's why I'm documenting all this stuff and my findings, and trying to get the information out there so more people can start to understand it. This is the best way. Other way is kind of sit in the chair, get the hip off, and again, just kind of getting into, again, I'm in a really deep hip flex position. And I just want to start loosening that gluteal muscles, and promoting the fascia to move. Once I can start to do this, again, just think about how much this area affects your whole body. There isn't a movement that you do, for the most part, that doesn't integrate your hips and your glutes in some capacity. Just because a lot of times, a lot of people really aren't having pain in them, but we call them that they do have tightness in them. We're not realizing that this is kind of the main area. But if you kind of start thinking about certain muscles, why does nobody really ever have adductor pain? It's because they're not doing their job anymore the way that we think they are in our secondaries. Again, if you kind of just follow the pain and follow the tightness, you can start to understand, I can't fix my foot until I fix my hip. I try to think it through and understand it if I could fix down the fascia down there, but the tissue down there relies upon the tissue here, and the tissue here relies upon the tissue here. And where is the big control? The big control is the hip and the glute. And once we kind of start to understand that, now then we can really start to kind of have some huge movement patterns. But we also have to loosen the exact opposite. So if I loosen here, then my next step is here. Because you have to have that equal and opposite reaction, and all too often, we're just kind of not understanding it. This is why, my glutes got so tight and then my belly started to kind of distend, because our glutes get tight. Well, we're just playing tug of war, and we're starting to end up more rounder in appearance, especially men, because we kind of do this and we're shortening our glutes, we're tensing. Okay, we're not realizing this is why people are walking with their feet out, is the glutes are tight, and now they're too tight to turn it in. I know I was for years. And then all too often we're blaming it on like a kind of little tiny pectineus muscle in terms of the rotation and getting in there and trying to loosen it, the gracilis. It's crazy to think this little tiny muscle is going to change our whole body, when it's these bigger muscles that are moving all the time and just kind of promoting new muscle growth and tissue and we're not realizing how that tissue deep down is really, affecting our movement patterns. 15, 20 minutes a day, at least in my opinion. If you can do more, awesome. But the more you kind of start playing around with this and kind of watching the videos, I guarantee you're going to start to kind of see some kind of improvements. The other thing I would recommend after doing the hips and glutes is kind of getting into the straight leg, whether again it's still kind of focusing back onto this hip and the glute, and working your way down into kind of the hamstrings and adductors. Again, if you think of the adductors, they're connected all the way. Okay, they're this kind of spider, right? They come through the back of my butt, okay, hip, and they come around, and they're attaching here, all the way down. But yet nobody ever seems to have adductor issues on the inside. Okay, at least I very rarely ever come across it. But the tissue's getting tighter and tighter. This is why, again, even on myself included, the knee started getting pulled in. You can see it, especially as I've loosened it. It's weird that it's kind of become a little bit more pronounced because it's hard to get this tissue on the outside to break up. But I realized the other reason for that was I wasn't spending enough time loosening my glute to allow the leg to move better. That's why I couldn't, maybe internally rotate enough or whatever. Again, a little bit different for women than men because women tend to kind of go in more, but they still end up with the same kind of issues, same scar tissue, just develops a little bit differently. Yeah, getting into the straight leg, and again, stretching this tissue, because again, the gastroc attaches to the femur. Hamstring literally bypasses the femur altogether. So why, if you think about it, it can start to shorten the distance. Same thing with the adductor. It's just pulling non-stop on the inside of our thighs, and it does more internal rotation than just true adduction. Because if you look at the fibers, the way they go, they come in at an angle. They're not straight in. They're swooping in, swooping in, swooping in. The only one that kind of comes pretty straight is here. But again, if my hips are tilted, well, now I just change the angle that it's going to hit. And that's what we got to start to look at when we're looking at body mechanics, is the angle of the joint. If I'm sitting here like this, well, my bicep can't work properly. I don't want to get into that too much, but just we need to start looking at where the bones are. We can see that people have these issues with posture, but we're thinking that the muscles are still working the way that they are and not, again, being so hard. Again, if the tissue didn't become so hard, it'd be so easy to fix posture. You'd just be able to tell somebody what to do and they'd be able to do it. But what's happening, the muscles are too tight and we're not understanding how that tightness reflects the rest of our body. All right, hope you found this helpful, and I don't know what the next one's gonna be, but figure it out. Thanks.